Morning. The open meeting of the Federal Election Commission for Thursday, July 14, 2016 will come to order. Before we turn to the items on the agenda, we have some late submitted documents. Mr. Vice Chairman, do we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move to suspend the rules on the timely submission of agenda documents in order to consider the late submission of agenda document number 16-27-B, draft B, agenda document number 16-27-B-1, revised draft B, and agenda document number 16-13-A-2.
Is there any discussion on that motion? If none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Madam Secretary, that motion carries by a vote of 6-0. First item on the agenda is the correction and approval of minutes. Mr. Vice Chairman, do we have a motion?
Yes, Mr. Vice Chairman, I move the, I don't have the date handy, so. I move to approve the minutes for the meeting of June 16, 2016.
Is there any discussion on that motion? If none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Madam Secretary, that motion carries by a vote of 6-0. Next item on the agenda is draft advisory opinion 2016-06, the Internet Association and Internet Association Political Action Committee, submitted by Ron Jacobs. We have a presentation this morning from Gregory Ketchum-Colwell and Jessica Selenkoff from the Office of General Counsel. We do have counsel for the requester present, and so if you'll take your place at the witness table. Good morning, and when you're ready, please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Peterson. Good morning, Commissioners. Agenda documents 1627A, B, and B1 present 3 draft advisory opinions in response to a request by the Internet Association and its separate segregated fund, IAPAC. The Internet Association and IAPAC asked several questions relating to their proposal to host online candidate fundraisers. At each fundraiser, the requesters and the participating candidate will advocate for the candidate's election and solicit contributions to that candidate. As a general matter, the drafts agree that the requesters may host the proposed fundraisers, although Draft A concludes that payments attributable to the fundraisers are contributions to the participating candidates. All drafts conclude that IAPAC must pay IA the software development and staffing costs of the fundraisers to avoid IA making prohibited corporate contributions. All drafts provide reporting guidance and also conclude that IA, as a trade association, may promote the events to its members as proposed. The Commission received 1 comment on the drafts from the requesters. Draft B1 incorporates a change discussed in that comment. We are available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for that presentation. We'll now open it up to discussion, either questions of requester, questions of counsel, or any discussion. Commissioner Goodman.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I intend to support draft B, I believe it's B-1, am I right, Madam Secretary? Is that how it was designated?
Yes, it is.
Yes, document number 16-27-B-1. Because the predicate for this request, and Mr. Jacobs, you correct me if I'm wrong, is fundamentally an online communication. And that is a webcast of a communication between IAPAC and people who want to log on their own computers and listen to what IAPAC wants to communicate. Is that an accurate characterization of what IAPAC wants to do?
Yes, that is correct. It would
Okay.
be online only.
And they're not going to pay a fee to any other third party to post this webcast on any other website?
That's correct.
Okay. And if I understood your supplemental submission, IAPAC is not going to incur the cost of a traditional event. They're not going to rent a ballroom, pay for valet parkers, pay for waiters, dinner or hors d'oeuvres, or any of those historical, real world, physical world events or costs. They're not going to be paying for those types of incidents and trappings in order to host what is essentially a communication.
That's correct. It's the entire event is a communication. There's not any of the traditional trappings of an actual event. It exists solely online.
Solely online?
Yes,
And takes the form of nothing more or less than a communication?
that's right.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, given that predicate, what the internet effectively does, and this was recognized by the Commission in 2006 when it adopted the new definition to public communication, is it takes old physical world events and reduces them to nothing more nor less than their communicative element. It takes what used to be an event where people had to come to a room and meet and converse, and it converts it to solely being the communication itself. And that fits squarely within the concept and contours of the rulemaking in 2006, which defined out of the term public communication all communications on the internet that were not paid for a fee. Now, the PAC here, in this case, we know from precedent, is permitted to expressly advocate and solicit contributions for candidates online. The Commission in 2011 approved an advisory opinion to Utah Bankers PAC, where the Commission concluded that the cost of the PAC's solicitations and advocacy via email and website would not be in-kind contributions because they were not coordinated communications. They were not coordinated communications because the communications were over the internet, email and website. So we don't have a public communication, and it is not therefore it's not a coordinated communication. Under the content prong, and we know it's not, we don't meet the content prong of the coordinated communication regulation under many precedents of this Commission, including MER 6477, Turn Right USA PAC, and MER 6722, House Majority PAC, all of which involve PACs posting videos supporting candidates, and this Commission concluded that there was no coordinated communication in those cases because all that was being posted were videos online. So I think we are in the right realm when we analyze this pursuant to the coordinated communication regulation. It is the exclusive measure or test of in-kind contributions arising from communications that are coordinated. That's why the fact that what is happening here is nothing more nor less than a communication is critical to choosing which regulatory rubric we use to analyze this potential in-kind contribution. Now, what the FEC cannot do is take this communication that is, and I believe Mr. Jacobs has acknowledged, there is coordinating conduct here, but we can't shop that around for the most convenient or generally worded or restrictive regulation when we have, like a square peg in search of a big enough hole to fit it in, when we have before us a classic communication. That's all it is. And so I believe that the E&J and the statements made in 2006 around the E&J made very clear that the only online communications that would be regulated as coordinated communications under the definition of public communication would be those paid for a fee. Now, I'm willing to answer questions about this because I understand there may be some questions about the candidate's participation in this communication. But the candidate's participation in this communication is just classic coordinating conduct. And because Mr. Jacobs has acknowledged we have coordinating conduct, you can't use the candidate's participation in the communication, that is coordinating conduct, to somehow supply the content prong of the coordinated communication required in the regulation. Nor can we take the conduct, the participation of the candidate in the communication, and somehow look for another regulation to put it under when he is communicating in a communication. And the commission's precedents on that are quite clear, ranging from Advisory Opinion 2003-25, the Wenzelfeld Committee, to Advisory Opinion 2004-1, the Bush-Cheney Committee, MER 5517, Stork for Congress. In all those cases, the commission analyzed a candidate's participation in a third party's communication under the coordinated communication regulation. So we know that when a candidate participates in a third party's communication, whether it's video, on television, wherever it is, the proper reference point is the coordinated communication regulation. The Christian Coalition case, referenced in the Commission's 2000 Coordinated Communication ENJ, also distinguished between expressive expenditures versus more traditional types of expenditures that you would expect to see at a fundraising event. The 2006 explanation and justification accompanying the Internet regulation also made that distinction quite clear, that there remain certain kinds of assets transferred to a campaign, and when those assets are transferred to a campaign for its use, that is an in-kind contribution. But where it is the PAC's communication disseminated solely online, the proper rubric or regulation for determining its regulation is the coordinated communication regulation. So we're in the right realm, we're in the right regulation, and it is inescapable that when you choose the coordinated communication regulation to analyze what IAPAC proposes to do, we do not have a coordinated communication and no contribution would result. So this is why I intend to support draft B-1 that would opine that IAPAC's internet-only communications involving the participation of a candidate in IAPAC's own communication is coordinating conduct, but not coordinating content. Thank you.
Do we have any further questions or comments? Commissioner Weintraub.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The fact that something is not a coordinated communication does not mean that it has no value and it's not otherwise a thing of value. I think what your clients have done is very creative and innovative and to be lauded. They've created an online space to hold a fundraising event. And just as if there were expenses associated with a physical space that they were providing in order to do a fundraising event, and that is the way you have characterized it, I appreciate my colleagues recharacterizing the event for you, and of course, you know, if it'll get you to the answer you want, you say, sure, we could call it that too. But the way you characterized it in your request was as an online fundraising event, and it's not cost-free. If it were cost-free, then we wouldn't have any cost that we needed to worry about as a potential in-kind contribution. But just as if you donated physical space to a candidate to hold a fundraising event, that would be viewed as an in-kind contribution. It doesn't ban the event in any way, just means that you have to account for the value of the space. There are apparently costs associated with this online forum. And what Draft A states, and I think that is the correct analysis, is that those costs have to be viewed as an in-kind contribution. You know, I think there's a variety of ways you could. Your client probably knows better than we do how to value the fair market, how to come up with a fair market value of what that space is. You don't have to, I think, take the entire cost that went into building the platform, just like you wouldn't have to take the entire cost of building a building just because you donated a room for a fundraising purpose. So I suspect that the costs actually won't be in any way interfering with your ability to run these kinds of events. But I do think it's a thing of value that is being provided to the candidate, and Draft A has the right analysis of it, so I will be supporting Draft A.
Any further comments or questions? Commissioner Goodman.
Just a brief response to my colleague, Commissioner Weintraub. That's what's so unique about the internet, is it takes old world physical events and it reduces them to being nothing more than bits and bytes of information being disseminated, not at cost, but for free. And the only cost associated to the PAC are the back office production costs. And we have never, and the E&J in 2006 said we would not count the production costs for internet communications. And that the only costs that would be regulated would be the actual fee paid to a third party to post on their website. And so I would just urge the Commission not to fight the technology and to bend to what this technology does. This technology has produced incredibly effective communication tools for people at very low cost, so low that the policy judgment of the 2006 regulation was that we would not count the cost associated with the use of one's own computer equipment. Now, what IAPAC is not proposing to do, it's not proposing to buy computer equipment and software and Skype-like communication tools and video cameras and give them to a campaign for its use. It is using its own computer equipment and video camera for its own communication and then inviting a candidate to participate in its communication, no different than had it uploaded a video posted by the candidate on the candidate's own website and played that video. The difference between the live participation of the candidate versus a video participation of the candidate is the same. Technology pervades everywhere, doesn't it?
Did a good job interrupting.
And I might add that in a series of precedents, the Commission has decided, and this was what animated the policy of 2006, was that, so for example, at page 18597 of the 71 Federal Register, with regard to party committees and their expenditures to create videos and content on websites, the Commission said, in addressing specifically, and I'm quoting, production costs of videos and other content, they would only be regulated, quote, when it is placed for a fee on a third party's website. The Commission clarified for political committees like party committees that the production costs would not be counted as contributions or expenditures. The Commission heard testimony on this issue with reformers proposing that there be some dollar cutoff, about $20,000 or $30,000, beyond which production cost would count as an expenditure or contribution. That testimony was from Don Simon and former Chairman Trevor Potter, and there was a colloquy between them and Commissioners Toner and Smith at the time. You can look at MER 6722, House Majority PAC, where this Commission, constituted here on this dais, the vote certification that was voted out 6-0 voted for no coordinated communication for House Majority PAC's online videos, and I'm quoting, with respect to the production and dissemination of the videos under the Coordinated Communication Regulation. In Advisory Opinion 2011-14, Utah Bankers PAC, the Commission opined that there was no coordinated communication, and again, I'm quoting, paid for, where the PAC paid for the project's website and email expenses, including staff time spent creating email and website content, internet vendor cost, and server time. All of those back office, back end costs for Utah Bankers PAC to post express advocacy videos online were excluded from the definition of expenditure or coordinated contribution. In Advisory Opinion 2008-10, I'm speaking for the benefit of my colleagues, but perhaps they're less interested in hearing me. But in 2008-10 in votervoter.com, the commission opined that the cost incurred by individuals in creating an ad on the internet was exempt from the definition of expenditure. In the E&J accompanying the 2006 rulemaking, the commission concluded there is virtually no cost associated with sending email communications, even thousands of emails to thousands of recipients. So the production costs here are not being given to the campaign for its independent use. That would be different. If I walked up, and Ms. Jacobs, I assume you agree, if IAPAC were to walk up to a candidate that it likes and say, here is some computer equipment, here is a video machine, here is software we've developed, it's quite valuable, use it to your campaign's benefit, I think you would agree that would be an in-kind contribution from IAPAC to that campaign.
I do agree. I think that that we used the analogy of a traditional fundraiser in the online space to demonstrate how the internet changes things. That it's not a traditional fundraiser. We didn't mean in any way to suggest that we were live streaming a traditional fundraiser. This is an online communication only, and I agree completely that if we created, if we handed the software over to the campaign, that's giving the campaign something of value. But the way we view this is squarely in line with the precedents that just as if we could create our own an ad that said, hey, give to Congressman so-and-so and put it on the website, that would be a communication under the internet rules that would not be a coordinated communication. The same thing holds true here, where it's the candidate is there in the room having a conversation, there's an ask, just as if you could, it seems to me that you could have that arrangement, videotape it, and put it on the website as a video ad, that would fit clearly within the communication, the internet communication regulations. So the only difference really is the fact that it is a live stream of that interaction with the candidate, that it all changes things, and it seems to me that it doesn't legally change anything because it's still that back-end production cost of the Internet Association to produce that communication.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions?
Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry.
I was just going to add that I'm going to be supporting revised draft B as well. And when I first read your request, and I should maybe preface this by saying that for a number of years, my colleague Commissioner Weintraub and I did a workshop at FEC conferences on corporate communications and use of corporate facilities and resources. And so when I first read your request and was thinking about it initially, this is a fundraising event, and within that rubric, I was thinking, okay, it's online versus physical, but there's still, whatever, just as with fundraising events, if a corporation provides their facilities or resources, there needs to be, proper reimbursement at the usual normal charge. Certain elements like use of mailing lists and use of directed employees, catering and so forth need to be prepaid. And so I was thinking of it under a very traditional model. But as I stepped back and considered this a little bit more deeply, once you strip away the traditional trappings of a fundraiser, once you get rid of the room rental, the catering, valet parking, sometimes entertainment's provided, sometimes there are photo ops. There is communication that takes place at a traditional fundraiser, but usually that's almost incidental to what's going on. And all of these other elements have very identifiable costs, and they are not small. Take away all those different elements, and what we have here really is, all that you have left is the communication itself. And it's a communication that is not, you're not proposing to use some other companies or some other entities' website or transmission network, paying them to carry this out. It would be the association's own website and its own communications platform. To me, this fits squarely within within the exception to the definition of public communication that the Commission promulgated back in 2006. And this really is an example of the way in which the internet is different in terms of that there isn't there isn't a marginal cost. Is there a value? Yes, there's certainly a value. Just like any time there's an opportunity to be able to communicate, there's some value. But we're not in the position of trying to attribute non-tangible value. In the traditional fundraiser context, we know exactly how much is being paid for room rental and for catering and for all the other elements. Here, what's the value of being able to use an online platform that was already pre-existing? I guess there was some enhancement to that platform in order to provide a donate button. But I don't see that. I don't see that as altering the course of this of the nature of the request either. So what we do have here is a communication that fits within the confines of the coordination, the coordinated communications rule. And since these do not constitute public communications, I believe that they are permissible. And I think that the analysis under revised draft B is the correct one. And for that reason, at the appropriate time, I will support that motion. Commissioner Goodman.
If I could ask Mr. Jacobs another question to help me make this distinction. If and I'm asking for your reflection on this question.
Sure.
If IAPAC contemplated renting out a ballroom at the JW Marriott Hotel and employing waiters and a staging rig and lighting and hors d'oeuvres and beverages and used direct mail to invite people to that event, and the total costs of that event were $30,000 to hold the event. And you set up a webcam at that event, and you streamed it live, including all the discussions from the podium. Would you count the $30,000 event as an in-kind to the candidate?
Yeah,
But the streaming itself would not be a coordinated expenditure?
Right, I think that's exactly right. I think that one of the things I think it's important to keep in mind is this, I don't think it would open up a door to sort of exempting a whole bunch of other expenses from the traditional regulatory framework. You couldn't spend $30,000 for a live event and suddenly try and claim that $30,000 under the internet exemption, because those are production costs. That's for an event that's a live event. You couldn't do door-to-door canvassing where you're paying your canvassers and just happen to stream it online or something like that. It's not a open the door to suddenly exempting the traditional physical activities from the rules, from the marginal cost analysis. It's this event exists solely in the ether. It is only a communication over the internet.
Mm-hmm. I might make the comment that I don't think it's lost on you, but you may have questions for us, that under either draft A that treats this communication and tries to account for some of the cost of the software as an in-kind contribution, or draft B1, which wholly exempts it because it's over the internet, and I maintain that the policy decision was the costs are so low that as a policy matter, the commission exempted them. IAPAC can achieve what it wants to do effectively.
Yes.
I look at some of the historical treatments of the commission when it did try to value internet communications, and to call your attention to MER 6795, a recent one involving Crew. Mr. Powers may be familiar with that one. But there the commission, Crew had posted, had done staff time, research, to do research about 16 what they called the most crooked candidates, emailed out information about the 16 most crooked candidates, included some electoral content, and posted those press releases on its website. And there, with all that staff time and all that writing and emailing, the commission concluded it does not appear that the cost of posting press releases on Crew's website and sending a mass email would have triggered the $250, even a $250 independent expenditure reporting threshold. That theory runs throughout both practical enforcement policy of the commission, as well as the policy of '06, why the commission was exempting internet communications that weren't paid for a fee as a matter of policy. So I think it's probably not lost on you, but your reflection, you can effectively do what IAPAC wants to do under either draft A or draft B1.
Right, that's right. Either draft works. One of the reasons we think the draft B is the more reflective, that reflects sort of what the current state of the law is that it is an internet communication, and the Internet Association is doing this because it wants to further sort of the use of the internet to show how the internet is fundamentally different. Its members all are engaged in a variety of activities that have changed traditional commerce in other activities that are fundamentally different now with the internet. Either A or B would work. It's a matter of trying to come up with the allocation of the cost in a way that, again, draft A seems to look backward to a marginal cost mentality where there's not necessarily one, whereas draft B recognizes the existing, I think, forward-looking internet communication regulations from 10 years ago and fits that activity squarely within those. And so therefore we prefer draft B, but certainly either draft would allow our client to accomplish its goals.
Well, we shouldn't get hung up on what to many in the real world, then, including for IAPAC, is I won't call it merely an academic disagreement over which rubric under which we might treat this. But it is worth noting on the academic point, that in 2006, the commission concluded that the internet really is a special case in politics, and that the commission said then, and that the internet had yet to tap its potential in politics, and that this agency should not get in its way, and that it was appropriate to exempt it as a class or as a unique medium, and it would be inappropriate to do that under the name of campaign finance reform, because we aren't the speech police, and ultimately what this is a communication, and we should free this speech in this medium. So for those reasons, I want to thank you for your presentation. Your supplemental materials were quite helpful in helping us revise B to get to B1, and if there aren't any other, I'll make a motion, otherwise, but I don't want to cut off discussion or debate.
Commissioner Rattle?
Thank you. I just have a simple point with respect to this, and I do appreciate your presentations and your request. And clearly, this commission, in all of its AO requests, has done what it can within the rules and within the purposes of our law to accommodate advances in technology. We're extremely consistent with that policy and that way of going forward. But I have to say that even in 2006, when this rule was enacted, contrary to what my colleague has said, and I agree with the points that were made by Commissioner Weintraub and I support the other response to your AO request. Let me cite to the E&J from the Federal Register, which says, this rule change does not exempt all political activity involving the use of technology from regulation. Therefore, for example, a political committee's purchase of computers for individuals to engage in internet activities for the purpose of influencing a federal election remains an expenditure by the political committee. So, and then it goes on to talk about in-kind contributions, prohibited in-kind contributions. I believe firmly that the initial AO response in this case, the original draft, is the one that is consistent with our law and with the rules, and that's the one I'll support.
Well, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Goodman?
Well, it's true that the E&J in 2006 did, after going through why it was exempting internet communications that are not paid for a fee on a third party's website, the commission was careful to say there are still these things out there that are in-kind contributions. And no doubt, when a political action committee buys computers, it's an expenditure that gets reported on its expenditure reports, but it's not an independent expenditure. It's not a public communication. So yes, yes, it is an expenditure that it has to report like any other expenditure. But under the discussion of in-kind contributions, you're right. The commission said the commission would also like to reiterate that the current regulations at 100.52D1 make clear that the provision of goods or services without charge or a charge that is less than the usual normal charge for goods or services is a contribution. And then it gave some examples of that. If the entity normally provides advertising and gives free advertising space to a political committee, that's an in-kind contribution. And the other example it gave to distinguish online communications by a group is when any organization transfers, and I'm reading, to a political committee a tangible asset such as an email list. I would include in that the computers themselves and software themselves. So yes, if they're going to provide those assets to a campaign committee, the commission was very careful in the internet, the explanation and justification accompanying the 2006 rulemaking to say there are still in-kind contributions, but just not communications over the internet on using your own facilities. So everywhere else, what the commission made very clear was that the only type of internet communication that would be regulated as a public communication, and I'm reading, is internet advertising placed on another person's website for a fee. And that was reiterated time and time again, that paid advertisements are the only internet activity covered by the new definition of public communication. So yes, I believe Mr. Jacobs has agreed that there are some things IAPAC could do, even in connection with streaming an event, that would result in an in-kind contribution, but not the pure communication itself. If there's any further discussion, otherwise I'll just move draft and we can get on with the votes.
Commissioner Weintraub?
I'd just like to ask council if they have any comments in general, or if they view draft A as inconsistent with the internet regulation and its E&J in particular.
Well, I think commissioners are aware of the recommendations that, that OGC made in this matter. I don't, because it's not public, I hesitate to get into the substance of them here, but commissioners are aware of what we recommended in terms of responses to the various answers, and our recommendation, of course, we believe is consistent with applicable law.
Well, how about the second part of my question? Do you view draft A as in any way inconsistent with the internet regulation or the E&J?
No, we don't view an inconsistency there, no.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Goodman?
I'll ask Mr. Noe the same question. Is there anything inconsistent with draft B1 with either the internet regulation, the definition of public communication, or the coordinated communication regulation? Once you choose to analyze it under the coordinated communication regulation?
No, and to address both questions sort of simultaneously, the drafts are not directed at each other particularly. They look at the question through different lenses.
They take a different fork in the road
Exactly.
on the proper rubric for analyzing this question.
Exactly. So having taken that fork in the road, I don't know that we would identify any conflict or inconsistency with the approach each one takes, but they obviously take different approaches.
Do you see anything fundamentally unreasonable for the fork in the road that draft B1 took, that this is exempt?
I don't know that we can give a view on the reasonability of a draft. I mean,
Mr. Vitalis?
If I may, and I appreciate the question. I don't think this is the best forum to answer it.
I wasn't going there until my colleague did. Sorry. I'll let you
I just want to be
up.
clear, because you said, I'm sorry, may I?
Oh, yes, Commissioner Weintraub.
You made a long and impassioned speech about how Draft A is fundamentally inconsistent with the regulations and the E&J. So I just wanted to, I don't think it is. I wanted to hear from our council whether they think it is. So I thought that was a fair question. That's all. That's the only point I was trying to make.
Mr. Chairman, much of my impassioned speech was reading from your statements in 2006, Commissioner Weintraub.
Do we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Goodman.
At this time, I will move adoption of Agenda Document Number 16-27-B1 in Advisory Opinion Request Number 2016-06.
We have a motion on the table. Is there any further discussion of that motion? If none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
Madam Secretary, that motion fails by a vote of 3-3, with Commissioners Goodman, Hunter, and myself in favor, and Commissioners Ravel, Weintraub, and the Vice Chairman opposed. Do we have a further motion? Commissioner Weintraub.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move adoption of Draft A, which is Agenda Document Number 16-27A.
Is there any further discussion on that motion? If none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No.
No.
Madam Secretary, that motion fails by a vote of 3-3, with Commissioners Ravel, Weintraub, and the Vice Chairman in favor, and Commissioners Goodman, Hunter, and myself opposed. Commissioner Goodman.
Mr. Chairman, as we've discussed with Mr. Jacobs here today, Mr. Jacobs and his client walk away from the commission with essentially a yes answer if you look at the two drafts. Despite our philosophical difference on how to regulate internet communications, whether it's treated as a low-cost communication where you account for some nominal value of the use of this technology, or whether you consider it wholly exempt. And I'm wondering if there's any interest in the commission of providing IAPAC some modicum of an opinion that says, although the commission could not agree on the rationale or the regulatory treatment, they are permitted to do. Now, Mr. Jacobs and Mr. Powers are sophisticated attorneys. They could certainly take the two drafts and advise their client that there were 6 votes to allow you to do this in some shape or form or fashion. But I'm wondering if there's any interest of the commission to provide this requester a piece of paper that essentially gives them a yes answer, although we couldn't necessarily agree on all the particulars.
Commissioner Ravel.
Yes, as we've discussed previously, I think we're consistent on a number of areas of this request, and I think it would be appropriate, not just for the requester, but for the public, to have an understanding of where we are consistent. So I'd be willing to do that.
Mr. Nodi.
And if that is where the commission wants to go, we wouldn't necessarily have to do it here today. There's enough time left within the 60-day deadline. We could write up a bare bones draft, and it could be voted on tally if the commission wished to take that route.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner
I'd
Goodman.
ask Mr. Jacobs. Mr. Jacobs, what would be your preference? Would it be of benefit to your client and facilitate their democratic political activity to have something like that, or are you happy with the two drafts you've seen voted out?
No, I very much appreciate the desire to create a draft that says yes. I think that's an important piece. It demonstrates that when the client asks a candidate to participate in something like this, the candidate says, well, what does the FEC say? So a yes would be a very important yes.
Well, then we will look to put together a consensus draft, kind of a stripped down bare bones, and get that resolved on tally before the expiration of the time period. Just out of curiosity, when is the 60 days going to run?
August 1st.
August 1st. Okay, so we have a little bit of time, but obviously, if we can move quicker rather than later on that, I think that then that will be wise of us to do that. So,
Mr. Chairman, one closing.
Commissioner Goodman.
For the record, Mr. Ketchum Caldwell is a rising second-year law student at the University of Virginia. who was pushed into this philosophical divide and handled it quite admirably. And so, Mr. Ketchum-Caldwell, congratulations. And to Mr. Powers, welcome to the other side of the table, Mr. Powers. It's good to see you.
I'm not so sure how I feel about him on the other side of the table.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you very
and
much.
we will resolve this as quickly as possible. Thanks again.
Thank you.
We'll turn next to agenda item number 3, which is Draft Advisory Opinion 2016-07, United National Committee. We have Tony Buckley and Nevin Stepanovic from the Office of General Counsel to give a presentation. Mr. Buckley?
Thank you,
Good
Chairman
morning to you,
Peterson.
and when you're ready, please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Peterson. Good morning, Commissioners. Agenda document 16-28-A contains a draft advisory opinion responding to a request from the United National Committee asking whether it qualifies as the national committee of a political party, namely the Unity Party. The draft concludes that the United National Committee does not qualify as the national committee of a political party because, as a threshold matter, the Unity Party does not qualify as a political party under the Action Commission regulations. The Commission received no comments on the request and one comment on the draft. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for that presentation. Do we have any questions of council or any further discussion on this request? Do we have a motion? Commissioner Goodman?
Mr. Chairman, I move adoption of agenda document number 16-28-A in advisory opinion number 2016-07, United National Committee.
Do we have any discussion on that motion? If none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Madam Secretary, that motion carries by a vote of 6-0. Thank you, Mr. Buckley. Next is agenda item number 4, which is proposed statement of policy regarding the public disclosure of closed enforcement files. I don't think we have a presentation from council, but do we? Oh,
Is there, with your indulgence, can I take 2 or 3 minutes just to quickly raise something I just noticed with one of the commissioners?
yes.
Thanks.
Oh, me.
Okay. Why don't we take a brief recess while that discussion takes place? It's now back in order. So as I mentioned before we went into recess, we are now on item number 4, which is proposed statement of policy regarding the public disclosure of closed enforcement files. Do we have a discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank my fellow commissioners, particularly Commissioner Weintraub. This has been sort of a year in the works to try to revise our public disclosure policy for enforcement documents. These issues come up from time to time, and as sort of myopic as they can be, they vex us often. And so beginning about a year ago, we started discussing revision of this policy. Commissioner Weintraub and her office, I want to thank her staff, and Mike Colombo, my staff, have worked very hard to try to compromise on this document, and I believe we've struck a compromise. And so I am prepared to move adoption of agenda document number 16-13-A-2 on the proposed statement of policy on the disclosure of certain documents in enforcement, administrative fines, alternative dispute resolution cases, and administrative matters, with the following edit at the table. On page 3, Madam Secretary, footnote 2. the first sentence of footnote 2 reads, "Supplements are documents that contain new or additional substantive analysis." And added to that sentence before the period will be this language, and Madam Secretary, I'll give this to you in just a moment, but in number 14 on that page, the category, everything after the parenthetical that reads, "From the Office of General Counsel, prepared for the Commission in connection with a specific pending matter under review, circulated through the Office of the Secretary for the consideration and deliberation of the Commission." That language is going to be replicated at the end of the first sentence in footnote number 2. Mr. Patalis, does that capture what you were concerned about? Now, we're going to leave that language in number 14. It'll be redundant because it otherwise tortured number 14 if I tried to reword that one. So what this effectively does is it modifies the supplements that will be automatically made public as a matter of policy to General Counsel's reports enumerated in number 4 and to memoranda and reports enumerated in number 14. Mr. Patalis, does that meet the concern that you?
It does, Commissioner. I think the way you've done it is fine. I think you could also take that same piece of language that you inserted at the end of the first sentence of footnote 2. You could also insert that after the word document, or maybe document in footnote 2. I think either way, it's just sort of a grammatical fielder's choice.
I thought it might work better there.
It's fine.
Because the type of documents we're talking about, modified documents,
Right.
that contain new or additional, and that are from the Office of, but I didn't put in the word "and," Madam Secretary, just from the Office of General Counsel. I think it carries the same import.
Right.
So that's the, I am at this time moving agenda document number 16-13-A-2 with that edit on page 3. That's the motion on the table, and I understood that Vice Chair Walther might have a motion to amend that he might want to make.
No, this is I'll talk about that afterward. I'm not going to move today.
Oh.
After talking to the General Counsel, but
Mr. Vice Chairman.
the word including an "and," you were going to give some symmetry to
I'm
that.
sorry, there is one other edit. On page 3, Madam Secretary, item 14, it reads memoranda and reports. Open paren the word "and," change the word "and" to "including." And that tracks the word "including" that we've used in other parentheticals, for example, in items number 1, 3, and 4. We're changing the word "and" to "including." So those are the 2 edits I have on the document and incorporated in my motion.
Do we have any discussion on the motion? Commissioner Rabel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I, too, want to express my pleasure at finally coming to the adoption of a policy. You noted that it's the enforcement policy, but also included in this document are some other documents that heretofore the Commission has kept in confidence that did not need to be kept that way and that should be disclosed to the public and easily accessible. And so I want to note that these were things that I requested at the beginning of my term as chair, and it's a little time has passed since that request, but there's a part of this policy that involves information with respect to ADR cases as well and administrative functions. And I also want to note, and it's actually a fairly long list of documents with regard to administrative functions that will now be provided to the public. But I want to note that there are more things that I think we could release to the public and that we should discuss at some point. I definitely want to go forward with this document today, and I appreciate all the work that's been done on it. But there's more to come, I hope, and I hope we can reach the same agreements on providing more information to the public rather than keeping it confidential. Thank you.
Commissioner Weintraub.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to express my gratitude to my colleagues and to their staffs. Both Commissioner Goodman and Commissioner Ravel had taken a leadership role on this issue, and I tried to synthesize the good ideas that came from both sides and put it in one place and try and formalize it so that we would have a real policy. Since I thought we were going to do a rulemaking to do this after the end of 2003, when we adopted the interim policy. So talking about a little time passing. Yes, indeed, far too much time has passed before we formalize this. And I also want to acknowledge Mike Colombo's good work and Casey Morgenheim and a lot of other people behind the scenes who worked very hard on this. I don't think it's perfect from anybody's standpoint. I think everybody gave up something that they would have liked to have seen in this document. But I think that actually is a good process, that we were able to come together around a long list of documents that we agreed on and we agreed should be made public, and we're going to increase the transparency of agency operations. I think it's good work on behalf of everybody on the commission, and I appreciate it and will be happy to support it.
Do we have any further comment or anything further in the discussion? If none, we have the motion on the table that was set forth by Commissioner Goodman.
Maybe I'll just mention.
Oh, yes, Mr. Vice Chair.
Yeah, I want to, also, it's, Commissioner Weintraub has been talking about this since I got on the commission. So I really want to congratulate you for, finally it's coming to fruition. And I think.
Stick around long enough so you can get something done.
Certainly, Commissioner Ravel, I do recall she made just a general request to say, to the general counsel's office, as I understand it. Is there anything that we can possibly make public that we're not making public now? And from that, we have a lot more here in this document than we would have if we were just looking at enforcement. And then, of course, Commissioner Goodman, once he gets on this thing, he's kind of like a bulldog, and he kept working this thing back and forth, and now we have a real nice product. There's one area where I'm going to make a motion in the future, and that is to ask for disclosure of documents that are sent by the Office of General Counsel to the respondent in pre-RTB matters. Right now, that's excluded, and that I think there'll be a consensus possible on it, I hope. I had some language prepared, and I discussed it with the General Counsel, and while being in favor of the idea, wanted to give it some thought with respect to whether it's more broad, I think, or less broad than you think you want it to. And so I defer to his thinking on that. We'll bring it up at the next meeting.
Commissioner Weintraub.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was remiss earlier. I don't want to make it sound like all the work on this document went on the ninth floor. The basis of a lot of what's in here came from the Office of Compliance, the Office of General Counsel. A lot of people within the building contributed their good thoughts and energy to coming up with a good list of documents that we should be looking at making public. So I just wanted to thank them, too, for their efforts.
Any further comments?
Just
Commissioner Goodman.
to the Vice Chair, I'll be happy to work with you and discuss other categories of documents. At least now we'll have a policy and a mark so that when we take up different categories of documents on a case-by-case basis, it'll be amending the policy on an item-by-item basis. I'll be happy to discuss it with you and work with you.
All right. We'll call for the votes then. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Madam Secretary, that motion carries by a vote of 6-0. We'll now turn to item 5 on the agenda, revisions to forms. This was an item that we discussed at length last time as we described the changes to the forms that are being contemplated. We kept it on the agenda for 2 weeks in the event that we were going to receive comments. We did receive one comment that dealt with the timing of when these would be becoming active for this current election cycle. So, but other than that, we didn't receive anything. I don't know if there's any further discussion that we have on this. If not, do we have a motion? Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the adoption of the proposed revisions to Forms 3, 3.1, CP 3X and 6, and instructions as set forth in the memorandum dated June 29th, 2016 by the Office of General Counsel.
Is there any discussion on that motion? If none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Madam Secretary, that motion carries by a vote of 6-0. Item 6 on the agenda, which is the draft notice of the proposed rulemaking on technological modernization. That matter is being held. We will hopefully be voting on that one at our next meeting, but we are continuing to have discussions on that matter as well. Ms. Orrock, are there any management or administrative matters that need to be discussed?
There are none.
Meeting is adjourned.